And we have Catherine Bunton from Chicago
Hi,
Area.
Catherine.
Hi, everybody.
So I think the question that I asked here in putting this webinar together, what does the US owe to Pakistan in light of the current flooding in Pakistan? It's a brutally obvious question with an obvious answer. But it's also very likely that the moral obligation that is obvious to us is never going to be honored, or at least not for a very long time. And it's a staggering moral obligation on the scale of reparations for colonialism or slavery or something like that. And of course, Pakistan is only one of many countries that are now bearing the brunt of climate change. And we are the perpetrators. There's just no getting around that. So let's, even though this is a staggering question with a apparently obvious answer, let's do our best to struggle for some meaningful way to deal with this very painful question. And so our first speaker will be Imam Malik Mujahid, who was born in Pakistan, but who lives in this country, who is a Muslim leader, and who will share with us his perspective. Take it away, Malik.
Thank you so much, Mary. Truly appreciate you contacting and deciding to speak on this topic. I'm glad you're doing this, but I like to keep the hope alive that, I remember marching for climate change when nobody used to talk about it. So now people are talking about it gradually with patience and endurance. We will be able to achieve this. May not be for Pakistan. We may be a little late for that. But, global north causes the problem and global south has to live with it. So it's not one country. It's about in 2014, something happened and France got United Nations to agree, and they landed with 320 soldiers in a country called Central African Republic. And other than my late friend and used to be on our board, Desmond Tutu, nobody said there is a genocide taking place in Central African Republic. So from Chicago, I sent a person from that region and a Chicago Tribune reporter, collected money from the mosque, and they came back telling us what is happening. It took us 1 year before Professor Samantha Power at the United Nations, she was American representative, said that almost all the mosques have been destroyed. And she mentioned 450 or so mosques. So when I researched what is happening, it turned out that France, which controls 25% of water market in Europe, Central African Republic is their French farmer colony. And they used to control through some puppets. So a government came into power, which was Christian and Muslim working together. It was called coalition government. So they landed, and because of that, a genocide took place. It became a Christian-Muslim thing, and there is something called Lord's Army, went around killing people. So the bottom line was water, because the underground water in Central African Republic is 10 times the size of Great Lakes put together. So these type of things, so global South have been suffering from different things. And now one of the most prominent thing is the climate change. They have least capacity to confront these type of thing. I'll take you back to Pakistan with that. I'm from a small town. Now its population is 200,000. It's no longer a small town. When I was a kid growing up, even if cloud comes, we'll start singing, and radio will have songs of celebrating cloud. Here you get depressed with cloud in your literature. Our literature, you start singing and partying, and you have a special cuisine for that, because rain and cloud were such a rare thing. Once in 2 years or something like that. Word monsoon is not in the vocabulary of Pakistanis. They hear about it, cyclone and these things. It is just, so the amount of water which they got is something which is very difficult to even imagine. And I'll share some statistics with you. It is in 73 years of history, this is the most widespread flood. 1/3 of the country underwater, you probably heard that. And 4.2 million people are directly impacted, about 1,500 are dead. So it is a huge thing in infrastructure and all that. And part of Pakistan where I come from, it is 400% more water than the average water they get. They did not get as much from the rain, which is still 400-500% more. But flood water from the north, where they have more, all they came down to that particular area. So that town of 200,000 people, now water is receding somewhat, but the whole city is in water. And my brother was telling me when I spoke to him, no telephone. There is I don't know how many of you know about the cultural aspect of it. You might have heard of untouchables in India. So there are Hindus in Pakistan are very rich people, but there are some untouchables. We call them Dalit. So there was a Dalit lady, very brave justice person, peace and justice person. So my family takes care of her if she has any difficulty and all that. So her job is liberating people from the, the forced labor situation. So she liberates them. And there was one area which I visited 4 years ago on that close to a water source, not a clean water. She calls it Azad colony. It's a free people's colony. So whatever she liberates, they settle. All those homes are demolished. And because they are poor people, and just like poor Muslim, poor Hindus are similar type of situation. And there were mud houses, not necessarily a legal property, and all gone. And she sent me a couple of video messages in her language that what are the dire needs. Now, flood receding, the flood of, disease is taken care of. How it happened? Directly because of climate change. So I would say if the science is right about the climate change, then there must be climate compensation. Because Pakistan didn't cause that. No way. I'll give you the statistics. Pakistan has 2.6% of the world population, yet it contributed only 0.4% of global carbon emissions since 1959. Way below its fair share of the safe emissions. And countries in global north, on the other hand, have exceeded their quotas by 92%. United Nations account for 4% of the population and responsible for 13% of global carbon. So I think continued inaction on the part of global north to reduce its emissions will further contribute to climate-induced humanitarian disaster around the world. I mean, largest city of Pakistan is Karachi. It is already projected by 1950 to 1960 that whole city of 16 million people, census have not been there lately, but it could be 20 million. And by that time, 2060, it may be 30 million. The whole city will drown. That's there, everything is there. But current flood food insecurity is tremendous because 1 million livestock. Now, livestock, don't think of the big farmers in America. Livestock is livelihood. A family might have just one cow. You understand the situation there? Instead of tractor, they might have, using livestock to take care of the land in some part. 80–90% of the standing crop of cotton is gone. 4 million acres of farmland, that is. So situation is extremely dire. And, Secretary General of the United Nations went there. And he says, I quote, never has seen climate change to this scale. And he warned, today it is Pakistan, tomorrow it could be your country. And I would just say that in conclusion, what I just said a little earlier, if the science is right about climate change, carbon emission and greenhouse gases and all of that, if the science is right about the climate change, then there must be climate justice. Global North, we all live here, we all benefit from it. I am guilty of taking much more share of consumption, which I do. We all are responsible for this. And I think for Pakistan, we may not be able to achieve that. And people are giving peanuts. European Union giving $13 million to Pakistan. If they just give 10% of what they're doing to funding Ukraine, most likely that will help tremendously. So I will stop here, Mary, because I took almost 13–14 minutes, and I will listen to what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Malik. This is pretty hard to absorb. Please, folks, if you have comments or questions, put them in the chat. And we're going to move on, and Kathy Kelly will speak next. Take it away, Kathy.
Thank you, Mary, and I'm very grateful to be here with all of you this evening. I want to start by recalling some language from the Gospels of Mark and Luke, in which Jesus sends the 72 disciples out in twos. And he says, go to the households in more remote areas and don't take anything with you for the journey. Knock on the door and see if the householder lets you in. And if they sit you down and give you food and beverage, then you eat and drink. Well, at that time, under the Roman Empire, because of expanding empire and new lands being part of empire and new trade agreements, it was more and more common for people not to be able to get as much funding as they could before for their crops, for their sales, for their trade. And so there were many newly destitute people who'd become displaced. And also in that area, there was a time-honored tradition that if a stranger comes to your door, you welcome the person, you don't turn them away, you share your resources. And so some scholars think that that particular section of the scripture was the New Testament gospel writers testing to see whether or not people were fulfilling that command, in a sense, to be kind to the stranger and not to turn away the homeless poor. But now the United States foreign policy and weaponization of drones has created a very different twist to that time-honored custom in Pakistan. For centuries, people in Pakistan have practiced a code which says you welcome the stranger, you share your resources. But now with weaponized drones that are outfitted with cameras, there are eyes in the skies that can track a stranger. And if the homeowner welcomes the stranger, the homeowner could be at risk of being targeted and surveilled by the United States drones and possibly killed. And
Excuse me,
so,
Kathy, should I be doing your slides at this point or not?
oh, well, thank you. Yes, please do show the first slide. Has
Okay,
happened again and again in Pakistan. And thank you, Kathy, for showing that first slide. This is a slide that depicts a young Afghan girl who, with her family, sought
Kathy, we
refuge.
don't see the slide yet.
I know. So Kathy, if you share screen, there we go. Thank you.
Got it.
Great. And then you could go to slideshow. Do you see up in the red band where it says slideshow? That's okay. We'll do it like this. So this young girl was in 2010 living in North Waziristan, and she was an Afghan whose family had sought refuge there, and the family was attacked by a United States drone which orphaned her. Both of her parents were killed, and some of her siblings were killed as well. And in 2014, a group of artists decided that they would make a huge poster of this little girl's face. We don't know her name. And they would embed it in the field so that high up above, a drone operator would never again just see a blip,
Oh my
a
goodness.
grainy blip. Instead, they would see this young girl's face.
No.
And we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is the picture. A lawyer, no, please go back one slide. This is a picture that a lawyer named Akbar Sayed gave to the artists, and it shows the little girl, and with two of her siblings, they're carrying shrapnel from the bomb that killed their
Oh.
parents and other siblings. And the artists decided to name their artwork Not a Bug Splat, because in military parlance, when a drone hits a target, the person who's been destroyed appears like a crushed insect. But that's why the artists decided they would call their artwork Not a Bug Splat. In military parlance, those who run away are called squirters. And I think we have to ask, is this kind of training now being spread all around the world as the United States teaches others how to use their drones? And I want to tell you a story. Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid had welcomed me and a small delegation to go to Pakistan. He took us to the airport and we departed and relied on many of his contacts. And so we were able to visit a man who had taken a long walk in 2 buses. He was from Mysore in Pakistan. And he told us about his experience when a drone hit the home of village elders who had welcomed a stranger. And he said because they were so far from a roadway and they didn't have any vehicles, they carried the broken bodies. They used scarves and putas trying to wrap the bodies and stanch the blood, and they carried them to the roadway. And they started trying to hail a car down, but the passing cars were afraid to take the stranger to a hospital because they feared that they might be targeted next. And so the code of hospitality changes. And I asked our friend, could you imagine ever sitting down with US people and talking about things that make for peace? And he looked at me like I was off my rocker. He said, Madame, who would be so crazy as to not to want the peace? Just we ask, you leave your weapons outside. I want to focus on the next slide, thank you, Kathy, which is a painting that Francisco Goya did. It's a painting that was depicting someone who had been among those rounded up by Napoleonic soldiers, and they were accused of having started a riot the previous day. And it's very unusual because in those days, the militaries were very often kind of lauded and glorified in artwork. But in this case, it's almost as though the military appear like a big centipede and all of the focus is on the victim. So I think we need also to focus on the victims. And if we could go to the next slide, this is a man named Adel Al-Mantari. He's from Yemen. He was a Yemeni government worker, and he with 4 of his cousins, and that included his cousin who was part of the military, were struck by a drone in Yemen in 2018. And Adel witnessed the horror of seeing his 4 cousins decapitated and strewn. And he survived. Many groups, including the very respectable Reprieve group in the UK, have pleaded with the United States State Department, Secretary of State, to acknowledge that they killed civilians. And Adel has now undergone 3 surgeries, and he just is now recovering from that 3rd surgery. He's had all manner of psychological and health problems, and he's got 2 sons who are his caregivers in Cairo, where he had to go to get the surgery. Not once has the US Department of State or the Pentagon ever even answered these requests. And so I had asked him to put in the chat, in the very first chat entry, the link to a GoFundMe campaign that activists here in the United States have started. And actually, we're now are going back to the State Department and Pentagon one more time because we're just about out, and he still needs physical therapy and ongoing care. The next slide shows someone who did take great risks to disclose the many times when the United States drones hit the wrong target in Pakistan and Afghanistan and elsewhere. And this young man, Daniel Hale, is now in Marion Penitentiary serving 4 years in prison because he disclosed a government document that acknowledged that the United States 90 to 95% of the time had hit, quote, the wrong target. The next 3 slides show the profits of Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin. And you can see that on February 24th, the first day of the war in Ukraine, those profits shot up. Who benefits from more? Major corporations. And I would also include General Atomics, which manufactures and sells so many of the drones. And what a contrast between them and in the next slide, I'm sorry, go ahead, the next slide and the next slide, thank you. These are my young friends in Afghanistan who collected all the toy guns they could possibly find and buried them under the ground. And then I'm sorry, could we go back? And they planted a tree on top of that burial. Mm-hmm. And these are youngsters who are incredibly resilient. They really want now just to be able to live in a country where their government won't try to punish them or possibly kill them. Certainly, they have not been welcome to come to the United States or Australia or the UK or Canada. It's very, very difficult to go there. Portugal and Spain have begun to welcome some of them. But, you know, in the next slide, Afghanistan is a country where so many people have been made destitute. They can't survive. And so they go to the nearest country, one country over, they go to Pakistan. And Pakistan has been absorbing refugees from the region for many, many decades. And they are at a point where, of course, as we listen to Malik, they can't continue. And so the young people that I know really must find a way to go to a different haven. But I think we have to hold these major corporations accountable. And I put in the next slide a project many of us are working on called the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal, to be held in November of 2023. We want to say, come, war profiteers, and give account. And so also in the chat is an email address that you can write to if you'd like to be involved with this. We want to have a tribunal that will feature the war crimes and the actual companies that are so involved. And these companies know ahead of time what kind of tremendous destruction they're causing. And I want to go to the next slide just to recall the wall across from the United Nations. They call it the Isaiah Wall, that features that incredibly needed quote about beating swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. And I want to let a non-human being have the last word of this presentation. And so in the next slide, Kathy, you'll need to click right on the actual tape that's in there in the slide. And these are the sounds of the ending of World War I. You'll hear loud explosions. And then I ask you to listen very, very carefully for the very last sound. So Kathy, could you click on that slide in the middle? Click on it.
Okay, I'll tell you what you need to do.
Yeah.
Go into, which software is it? Is it PowerPoint?
That's right. Go to share screen and click sound.
Oh.
Can you go to share screen on the bottom, Kathy? Or make me a co-host?
I'm in share screen.
You've got to exit out of share screen, go back in, click the bottom two boxes, which
All right.
will allow you to enable sound.
Okay,
Thank you,
so
Jen.
I get out and then what do I do? Go back in?
Yes.
Go back to share screen. When you hit share screen, you'll see two little boxes in the bottom. One says enable sound. Click those boxes.
Share sound.
Yep.
Okay.
Now start the slide again and click it. You should get the sound.
Ooh, I hope so. What? Maybe over here.
Okay. Well, you know, I'll just tell you about this. I'm so sorry. I should have
sorry.
practiced this ahead of time. You hear the loud explosions, and it's agonizing because they kept firing at each other right up until the 11th minute of the 11th hour of the 11th month of World War I. And then there's silence. And then you hear a bird call.
Oh,
And I think that it's a fitting image for what we need to do to recognize all of being. We're all in this together. Thank you very much to each of the panelists. I'm so pleased to be with you. And Mary, thank you for this invitation. And thank you, Kathy, for taking us through the PowerPoint. Bye now.
I apologize about that last one.
Okay, Vince Gaddis, it's your turn. Vince is up. Take it away, Dr. Gaddis.
Well, there is very difficult to follow, Kathy. I should have thought about that before when we did the order. But I want to thank her and the Imam for what they said. It is so important to not only humanize this, because the way I'm going to talk about it might sound like an abstraction. So it's important to humanize these stories. And this is not part of my presentation, but one of the things that we have to think about is the deeper that climate change goes, the more instability that comes through climate change that we're gonna talk about, the more threatened government becomes, the more likely there is for more political violence. So these two things are not unrelated. Drone use, military oppression, and climate change. So I think we need to think about that these two things are not unrelated, not to mention the fact that Pakistan, as we all know in this room, a very enlightened group of people, that Pakistan is also a nuclear power, right? They have nuclear weapons. And so we have to think about the whole milieu of what does that mean in the midst of climate change. So Imam said something very important, and I'll come back to it now. Pakistan contributes less than 1 percentage point to overall global warming. The 26 wealthiest nations in the world account for 28% of all, 50% of all emissions. And all the other countries in the world combined, and China is in the developing nation list on this, which is 13% of all emissions is China. So China and all the rest of the countries are the other 50%. The United States, as we all know, 5% of the population, 25% of all emissions is coming from the United States. And Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable nation states to climate change for two reasons. One, in the northern part of the country, in the Himalayan range, are some of the largest glaciers on the planet outside of the North Pole, outside of the two poles. Some of the largest glaciers in the world are in the Himalayan range. Much of that is in Pakistan. As temperatures rise, the glaciers melt, more flooding. Then add the heat of the earth going up means more evaporation, which means that these cyclones and other storms and floods and rains become even more pronounced. Now, what does that look like together? Let me throw a third thing in, which is drought and heat wave. So think about this cycle. So it's the dry season. Karachi in 2020 hit 128 degrees, which many of us have heard. You've heard of things like a 500-year flood. You've heard of that before, right? That term. Okay, so those kind of temperatures was a 1 in 300-year event. But now what climate scientists are looking at is that will be a 1 in 3 to 5 year event. So enormous temperature increases during the hot season, which means more evaporation, more melting of the glaciers, more flooding. Where the Indus River Basin, outside of the Indus River Basin, that means more drought, lots of drought. Now bring the cyclones and heavy rains several months later, and you have that dry ground can't absorb this excess water added to the water from the runoff from the glaciers, and you get the kind of flooding we've seen in these last few months. And this is not something that's going to be ending anytime soon. I find it interesting, and I'm not, well, you can take it any way you want to. I don't really care. We're doing everything possible to take care of people in Florida right now, and we should. But imagine if what happened in Florida was 1/3 of the eastern seaboard. Pakistan, if you take geographically, if you went from North Carolina to Maine, from the Appalachians to the Atlantic Ocean, that's the size of Pakistan geographically. Now take 1/3 of that and put it underwater in a flood. Can you see the immense amount of human life that is, something like 35 million people were displaced, and I mean, just the numbers are tremendous. Now, here's the other side of this coin. The question is, what does the United States owe Pakistan? Well, in the last 2 years, the UN Climate Fund, which is contributed to by some nations, including the United States to some degree, was $329 billion. Almost all of that is being spent in the wealthy countries. And I mean, yeah, I want to get a Tesla too, and I need an electric for it. Okay, that's fine. But you know what? These other countries, the global south, where the effects of climate change have been more pronounced, are not getting these funds. Now, let's go a little deeper. If we want to prevent the 1.5 centigrade rise in temperatures, which is the level at which, if we pass that, becomes irreversible and catastrophic. The UN says it's going to cost about $4.15 trillion, right? To produce all the to get the wind, the solar, all of the other, freshwater systems worked out, and, all of that, the costs. Well, we're spending in the last 2 years, 300 billion. So we're not even close to even thinking about the kind of real costs of climate change. What does the US owe Pakistan? I don't know. What do we owe Syria, which is the first climate change war? What do we owe? Hell, what do we owe Puerto Rico? Right? I mean, if we think about the devastation of climate change just in terms of the numbers, we're already, people are thinking about this, which is good, but we've already had our first climate change war. We've had our first climate change refugees. And now that is exasperated with what's going on in Pakistan now. But this is not only Pakistan. I'll give you one more example and then I'm going to shut up. Who here is a coffee drinker? Come on now, don't lie. You love you some, come on now. You love you some coffee. Okay. One of the most important coffee growing areas in the world is Ethiopia. Climate change right now, in the next 10 years, could devastate coffee production in Ethiopia because of drought. So as drought and extreme weather continues to happen, right, commodities that these countries depend on, like coffee, will be gone. But of course, other crops, very thirsty ones that probably shouldn't be part of economic growth strategies, have been in places like Pakistan. Cotton is an incredibly thirsty plant, right? And so now you have that problem. And then within Pakistan, within these nuanced ideas, and I'm throwing a whole bunch out there because, you know, there's a lot here to unpack and we don't have time to unpack it all. So I'm just throwing some ideas at you. They have a ministry of climate change to try and deal with these issues and how do we mitigate and so on. But at the same time, for economic growth purposes, they are permitting as quickly as possible coal-fired power plants. Because if you're in the global south and you want to modernize, you need power. And right now that power is coal power. So you've got this dual action happening. Modernization requiring power, and the cheapest form of power in those countries is coal. At the same time, dealing with the effects of climate change in the way that it is happening within the country. So within Pakistan, there has to be a discussion about what is the way forward. But Pakistan needs all of us to help them, and we need to take more aggressive action ourselves to reduce our own emissions. The United States, what the United States owes Pakistan is to be carbon neutral, right? As quickly as possible.
Very good.
Right? What we owe Pakistan is the financial resources to be able to create infrastructure to do zero emission energy production through wind, solar, geothermal, etc. Because the other tricky thing in here, and then I'm going to end with this, the other tricky thing in here is one of the major sources of power is water power, hydroelectric power. But hydroelectric power requires that you dam rivers. And when you dam rivers, you create other problems downstream. And so this is not necessarily the best approach either. So we have to find ways of producing energy that are clean, renewable, that are not based on hydropower, because when you dam the river upstream, then downstream effects can be catastrophic. So where is that balance? Where is the technical assistance? Where is the money to assist Pakistan in coming up with the solutions that Pakistan needs for itself, not us dictating to them? But what do we owe Pakistan? I owe them having a fuel efficient car, recycling, advocating for politicians who believe that climate science is real, because it's a settled question. All right. I'll just stop right there. We can just get into the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you to each of our speakers.
Wow.
I'm all stirred up. It seems to me that, you know, we recognize our consumption as a major problem, but I don't think it's anywhere near as big a problem as the fact that we have failed to break the grip of the fossil fuel industries on our government at the federal, state, and even local level. We haven't used our political power and our activism yet sufficiently enough to break that industry, because the fossil fuel industry has no intention of stopping. Not just no intention of stopping drilling and marketing what they've already got, but they have no intention of stopping exploration and drilling for new places to extract oil and gas and coal.
I would agree with that. I would go further in this. part of the major issue with climate change is an even larger systemic problem, right? It's the systemic problem of capitalism itself, which would, and what I, when I say that, what I mean is this. Capitalism is based on ever increasing profits and growth. How do you have increasing profits and growth when you have finite resources on the planet? Those two things don't work in concert forever. You cannot have perpetual economic growth and profit with finite resources on the planet. And so it's not only, let me give you an example. I was talking to a couple friends of mine. They are scientists out in New Jersey. One works for a pharmaceutical company, boo, and one of them is a geologist who works for EPA, yay. And okay, it is possible right now to make everything we make from plastic and make it from hemp. Not that hemp, the other hemp, right? And hemp itself is a really powerful carbon-eating plant. But Mary's quite right. As long as we have a fossil fuel industry that wants to make plastic out of petrochemicals, which are rooted in oil, petroleum, we can't get there. The technology is there already, but it requires a political will to do this. Well, I'll stop right there. It takes a political will to do this.
So the floor is open for other people to jump in here with your questions and your reactions. Go ahead, Anne.
Kathy or Dr. Gaddis, I wonder if you could comment also on the contribution of the arms industry and everything that supports the military to climate change, and how those industries and the fossil fuel industries relate to each other. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Gaddis.
Okay, I would think that would be you, but okay, I'll start and you can finish. The way well, first of all, war is the most environmentally catastrophic activity that man engages in. If you've seen the video footage from the Ukraine, that's not only the devastation of war, but it's an environmental catastrophe, right? So how the two relate to each other, the military of course is a main driver of using these kind of, fossil fuels and so on, and the equipment that the United States, I'll talk about the United States, but military in general, the equipment that they use is incredibly inefficient, right? So thousands of pounds of jet fuel to fly a plane, for example, the amount of carbon that is emitted in those ways is catastrophic to the planet. At the same time, if you think about the war in Ukraine, I think as historians, we will be looking at this also, not only as Putin trying to, recreate the Russian Empire, but also that he knows that he cannot lose control of a region that is so vital for A, food production, but B, Ukraine has the largest deposits of uranium and other metals used in battery production and all of those activities. And so Russia doesn't want to negotiate for those. They want to take them. So in many ways, this is also part of the war that's going on there. So the military is incredibly inefficient. They rely almost exclusively on coal and oil power to do what they do. And the effects of the weaponry of war create environmental catastrophes, not to mention just the waste of the spent military shells themselves. I'll end with this, part of Puerto Rico, there's a US military base there, and part of the island is completely uninhabitable because it is where the US military has stored all of these 55-gallon drums of super toxic material just out in the open.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
And I would just add that I don't think we can have a rational discussion about facing the real threats. Maybe we should say hyper threats that we face: the threat of climate catastrophe, the threat of nuclear weapon proliferation, the threat of more pandemics. We can't even have a rational discussion about this without talking about how to dismantle the military in the United States and all around the world, because of exactly what Dr. Gaddis has pointed out. But instead, and this is what Imam Malik Mujahid has pointed out again and again, instead people are told to be frightened, be afraid of Islamists. These are the threats. These people threaten your security. So our security in terms of homes and resources and water and a livable future for the planet, those don't even count. These militarists will persuade us to be frightened of enemies to such an extent that we'll approve of terrifying people in other countries who've meant us no harm.
Kathy, would you like to take a few moments here to talk about the work you're currently doing to try to bring the war industry to account?
Well, and we'd certainly welcome any of you to join in with us on this idea of having a war crimes tribunal. And we've been fortunate to get good support from people like Noam Chomsky and John Pilger, Mairead Maguire. There are plenty of people who say, yeah, this is a good idea, but what we need now is to engage the grassroots further with this. So it's November of 2023 when we would hold the tribunal, but on November 10th of this year, we want to deliver subpoenas to General Atomics, which manufactures drones, and to Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, all of them located in Virginia, and say to them that they should disclose the kind of information that is necessary to be able to understand how much money have they spent on weapons, what's been done with their weapons, how much do they spend on lobbying, because the more we feed those big corporations, the more money they have to then unleash legions of lobbyists who kind of terrify the elected officials, who either give us more money to feed our greed and our destructive capacities, or we'll make sure you're never elected again. It's a vicious cycle, and it ought to be broken. So we thought of having a war crimes tribunal kind of patterned on what Bertrand Russell did during the Vietnam War. And it'll mostly be online, and it'll go for 3 days, November 10th. And Armistice Day will encourage everybody to be involved in Reclaim Armistice Day actions, and will continue the 12th and the 13th with testimonies primarily from people who are survivors of wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Gaza, Somalia, Pakistan. And I hope it'll be compelling testimony. But meanwhile, we can't wait until 2023. We've certainly got plenty to do right now along the lines of what Dr. Gaddis has suggested. Malik, did you want to make any comments on what you're working on?
And what reference I do too many things.
Well, maybe tell us about Sound Vision and the Muslim TV news.
Okay, so I will take just a minute to say I have a hard stop at 8 p.m. Muslim Network TV is a sort of peace and justice television. It's 24/7, 8-hour programming repeated 3 times. And you can watch it on muslimnetwork.tv website, or it is available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, or you can download the app on your iPhone with Muslim Network TV. And a lot of peace and justice people are on it. And we continuously provide unique insight on what is happening.
Thank you.
That sounds like a wonderful resource. I know you said you have a hard stop. Can you put that in the chat? Or can
Sure.
someone, Kathy?
It
Sure,
is.
I can put it.
Can I ask what's probably a dumb question?
Please, go right ahead.
How minuscule is trying to overturn Citizens United in this country in order to begin addressing some of this, the fact that we've lost control of our government to people with a lot of money.
It certainly matters. Abby, are you working on a campaign to do that?
No,
Oh, okay.
but I wonder, does that make a difference, or is it too local, too parochial to think in those terms?
Jeremy Corbyn recently wrote something in which he said there's a vast array of greatly needed grassroots efforts, and every single one of them is important. I think there's no hierarchy really in what is most important, but what impassions you and gives someone a sense of ongoing dedication. That's very important.
Thank you.
You know, well, and he's now off, but I wanted to ask him about the political leadership of Pakistan now. Remember back when we started bombing in Afghanistan, when we went into Afghanistan, and it was, they're harboring terrorists in Pakistan, and that's where I think they finally found Osama bin Laden. And the political leadership, according to our media, they were akin to supporting terrorists. Is that still the mindset of the US government toward the Pakistani leaders? Have the Pakistani leadership, is it very different?
Well, I think I could speak for Imam Abdul Malik. Imran Khan, the former prime minister, was ousted, and the generals who ousted him recently appeared in the United States to meet with the United States military. And there are just thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the streets of Karachi, in Islamabad, in Quetta, protesting the ouster of Imran Khan. Imran Khan said no more drones. That's it. He forbade any more of these drone attacks to happen in Pakistan. And he had a lot of grassroots support. The economy is coming to a collapse level, but most of the people whom I'm hearing from Pakistan are saying that the ouster of Imran Khan was an unfair decision that was made in capitals outside of Pakistan. So I'm not sure what will happen in that regard, if he might possibly be restored to power.
In other words, we were meddling in that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
As usual.
Yeah, as usual. Oh, God.
Catherine Bunton, go ahead.
This is one of many tangents that were mentioned tonight, but I remember how one of Naomi's first major books, Naomi Klein on climate change, was titled This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, or was it Climate versus Capitalism? And in that book, she didn't go into a lot of detail, but so many people understand that this infinite cycle is a myth, that you cannot continue to use up all your resources and sell commodities forever, and that you're depleting those resources. So I always, think, well, give me some tools, give me language to talk about how do we dismantle capitalism. And I'm very guilty of not having read this book, but I'm going to hold it up. I was introduced to it about, maybe a year and a half ago. And an issue today raised this with me. It's called In Defense of Degrowth. And it, I think, is a theoretical framework that maybe started in France a few years ago. But you don't hear anybody talking about it here. And I'm just thinking maybe this is like a little primer to help us start thinking about how do we talk about dismantling in an orderly fashion capitalism that's gone amok, So I just wanted to share that. This book was written by, looks like a George and a Giorgos, Georges Kallis, Kallis, and edited by someone else. But the concept is always called degrowth. And I mean, because it's kind of a big thing to think about. How do you begin to talk? We do a lot of lobbying on our climate issues with our local reps, and they know us. How do we begin to talk to them about capitalism is, the core, one of the core problems that we're going to have to deal with. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
And Anne has her hand up, Mary.
Go ahead, Anne.
I wonder if anybody who has thought about this could comment on the idea that one of the ways that we resist capitalism and try to undermine it is by finding other ways to, ways like, I don't even know exactly what to call them, but cooperatives, mutual aid, free stores, ways of getting things to people who need them that don't involve profit for anybody. So I would appreciate anybody's comments on that idea.
Well, I think property, the whole concept of property is theft and profit, certainly. Because how could you have profit without having somebody who didn't profit? There is, of course, the notion of a barter where I give somebody something I don't need and they give me something they don't need. And, there is something mutual about that. But obviously it's not going to work all the time for everything, which is why we bring in money. And then once we have money in, then we end up having, some of us having more profit than others, and it all escalates. So I think we have to, I totally agree with what you're saying, Catherine, that we need to somehow get out of the entire valuing of stuff, of material things, and somehow, just awaken to the idea that the things that enrich life it's not the stuff. Once you are comfortable enough, once you have enough, the shelter and food and clothing, if you need it, and it would be best if you lived in places where we didn't. But once we're past that point, though, the richness of life is something much greater than stuff. And I think if we can get to there, that's how deep the mindset will have to be changed though. And it's really going to be difficult. I mean, it's our children where the hope is, or our grandchildren now.
Well, along those lines, I would highly, I love being in a group with you guys because you'll catch all my references. George Carlin has a classic bit, right, called Stuff. And I have my classes routinely, I play that for them because it emphasizes that, I mean, you got so much damn stuff. There's a whole industry based on watching your stuff, I mean, it's a great bit, but it's so full of truth. And I am as much for the overthrow of capitalism as the next guy. In the meantime,
Yeah.
one of the political things that we can do as we advocate for greater regulation, advocate for greater responsibility in terms of climate, is to emphasize things like green chemistry. Because as much as we as individuals recycle and make sure we've got everything separated between the cans and the bottles and the paper and and doing all of that, the real catastrophic climate action is not at the end user. Like, they want to make it our fault, like you're not recycling enough, and if you did, climate change would be reversed. It's at the production end where all kinds of harmful chemicals are put into every product, which at the end of the cycle are not biodegradable and only add to the climate disaster in any number of ways, even as they break down, or they don't break down and wind up in the oceans and cause a whole other problem. So part of our advocacy has to not only be a true militancy about dismantling the military industrial complex, dismantling capitalism as a whole, but we also along the way have to be saying we have to change the way we make the stuff. We got to change the way we make the stuff.
We are at 11 minutes after 8, and I don't want to exhaust our speakers because I want them to come back someday. But if folks want to continue for a while, that's okay too. But our speakers might, I want to not pressure you, Kathy or Vince, to hang around longer than you want to hang around.
I have a few more minutes.
Same here.
I'd like to get the other Vince's opinion on some of these things, because he is the Vince who's the real intellectual here, not me. It's the other Vince.
I don't know about that introduction, but this is something that, I mean, it's been going on for so long, this north-south. I mean, before Willy Brandt called it to our attention, it's been going on since the 19th century. And nobody in the advantaged North seems to care. That's, I mean, except people like us, people who, and the songwriters. In fact, I had just pulled up on my screen a song from the late 60s by Pierre Celos, And of course, he wrote and sang in French, but I mean, it's so absolutely. I'll translate some of it for you because I mean, this just reminded me of it. What was being said this evening just reminded me. There are suns that never rise. There are countries where life dies as soon at the sound of songs, where life dies at the sound of songs. There are looks that break the lightning, looks that break the lightning, looks so too beautiful to have suffered. There are the children with the huge stomachs. We've seen those images. There are children who do not understand. There are children who have no clean water, no rivers. There are children who the only fountain is a flask of water. On the horizon, the sky becomes red with the sun rising. The time is coming. We refuse to listen to their cries. The time is coming where they will come here. That's interesting because it's happening now. I know a country where the huge boats take to the sea to throw out large quantities of wheat simply to raise the price. Could we go back to the time of love, the time of life? Can we go back to the time of love? It is not over. Why sing of these strange lands or foreign lands? Why sing of these foreign lands where the man is nothing but the shadow of his hunger? Why sing of these foreign lands? The world is so large. Love is so far away to stretch out the hand, the hand of friendship. I mean, that's from the late 60s, early 70s, and we still have not learned. I mean, I was doing my own translation, having it in French in front of me and doing my own translation, but yeah, this discussion this evening brought that back to me. And I am filled with such regret that we have not learned.
Vince, is that on YouTube, that song?
Yes, it is on YouTube in
Could you
French.
send a link to that? I mean, even if it's in French, I'd like to hear the music with it.
Yes. Mais pour chanter ces étranges terres. I don't think I can post it because I can't post anything in chat, but
Okay.
I'll send
Well,
it.
can
I'll
you
send
like
it to
email
Mary.
it?
I'll send it to Mary. I cannot paste into chat. It's something that I don't know why, but or if we have time, here it is. Let me.
I should say, dear friends, I learned this evening that a very dear mentor of mine died, and he was Brother Conrad, who taught me in high school, and I do need to make a few phone calls to share that news with others. So I'm going to say good night and goodbye to all of you and wish all of you well, and thank you so much Vince, and Mary,
Thank
and
you.
great to be with all of you.
Congratulations,
Thank you
Kathy.
so much, Kathy, for being with us tonight, sharing so much with us.
Okay, good night now. Oh, maybe I'll just share from Rumi. When is music forbidden in Islam? It's when the music is the sound of spoons on empty plates,
Oh my
and the
God.
poor people hear that.
Oh my God.
Right now.
Night. Thank you, Kat.
This has been a beautiful conversation. While Vince is looking for his link to send me.
I've got the link.
Oh, good.
I just,
Oops.
You ready? Yeah, I'm going to say goodnight. It was great to see you all. Thank you, Mary, for putting this together.
Thank you, Cindy. Hello to Roger.
Yeah, Roger's right there.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Cindy. I think I met you about 20 years ago. This is Abby.
Oh,
Good to see you.
take us out.
Who else would like to share anything?
Well, I realize that I'm not really part of this group, and so the questions I'm asking are out in left field to you people, but is there any advantage in working towards regulated capitalism?
Have to leave.
Well, it's certainly the important intermediary step, I would argue. But how do we get there in today's polarized politics? And that I don't have a solution for.
But if we
But
can't get
the
there, then
only
it-
power that
it-
can regulate, the only
I'm
power
sorry.
that can slow down capitalism or regulate it is government.
Right.
But you've even got people who, even Democrats who say I'm pro-business, whatever, are just as much in the corporatist handbag or whatever you want to say, in the palms of their hands as anybody else.
Right.
This is the problem.
But if we could at least get some regulation, then it would mean that the extremes of income weren't so immense. And if we could insist that our senators can't be bought, it would make at least a start, I think. But perhaps I'm naive.
Now, I agree that it would be a good first step, but I think the real problem with capitalism is it rewards the wrong things as virtues, including just simply competition and and whatever you can get away with.
Right.
I mean, that's an integral part. It's like a fundamental building, building stone or whatever of capitalism. So it's like, it's got to be only as a temporary state, highly regulated, and then it's training wheels, perhaps. I always think socialism is training wheels, and then anarchism in the Emma Goldman, Sasha Berkman tradition is the ultimate thing, where the inner cop is the cop. That's the cop that's on 24/7. That's when we would have peace, I think, when we control ourselves.
Yeah, well, and historically speaking, sometimes if there's enough pressure over time, some of these kinds of things can happen, right? I don't, well, I'm a historian, so here I go. But the Ocala demands of 1890, here were a bunch of disaffected farmers who were upset, organized themselves politically, and some of the things that they wanted was a graduated income tax. That was seen as the most radical, that was one of the most radical ideas facing capitalism. Regulation or nationalization of the railroads and the telegraph system. I mean, and 1896 became an election which shifted the country down the conservative economic track rather than this hard left track, right? Of the kind of regulating I think you're talking about, of regulating capitalism. But even though McKinley and the conservatives won, it still took several more years, but we wound up with the graduated income tax, a set of the federal sub-treasury, which we call the feds today, right? Direct election of senators. So radical ideas can become policy, but it takes time, and you don't get everything you want. And we just got to be real about that and understand, part of my problem with my students are having with me, well, and a lot of people, we've lost the ability to discuss things with nuance in America.
Right.
Everything is way over here or way over here. And the truth is, these are complex issues that require nuance to talk about. Of course you can't get any more fundamental than ecological catastrophe. But can we talk about green chemistry? It seems, I would love to, somewhere along the line of dismantling capitalism, I'd like to see high-speed rail in America. Okay. So anyway.
Thank you, Dr. Gaddis.
Shall we wind down, folks?
Yes,
This
I'm
has been a
ready for the Merlot.
Conversation. I will figure out what I can do with the recording. And I encourage all of you to save the chat. I'm going to stop the recording.